Andy, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
We
we can.
can.
Oh, that's good. Sorry, I'm a little bit late.
No, you're
That's all right.
absolutely
That's
fine.
fine. We had a bit of a
We're-
technical problem anyway.
Oh, that's
We're very grateful that you've joined us, especially with your everything that's going on you know.
yes,
So,
potentially a little chaotic at the moment, but we're yeah, if I run away very quickly, you know what's happened. But I think we'll be okay.
so thank you very much. So, just on that, Russ was just wondering, do we have any update on Farrell or Murphy? Because we haven't really heard anything.
No, so Farrell was back in training, was my understanding, and Murphy was always said to be after the international break. So we'll probably get a clearer idea next Wednesday when John Vecino, I think it'll be Wednesday next week, speaks to the press. But yeah, that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So, bit of a different transfer window for you this, because obviously you were out in Paris, weren't you?
I did miss a few weeks of it, yes.
Yeah, but give us like any. I'm not saying give us all your secrets away, but give us a bit of an idea of how transfers work from your end. Like, how do you get the information, and do you know weeks in advance? Like, sort of, do you hear names, or do you literally just hear it a few hours before we all know?
So I used to, back in the day, the club used to give us like a half an hour heads up where they'd send us the press release half an hour in advance just so we knew. But they've kind of stopped doing that the last few windows. So sometimes I've got an idea of when something's coming, but sometimes I just know, like, I might get the vibe, or someone might suggest to me, yeah, it's happening this afternoon or this evening. And literally that's all I know. It's happening at some point that afternoon. It does always make me laugh when people tweet me on a Monday saying, how many in this week? Because, I mean, no, even John Vecino couldn't answer that question, honestly, even if he wanted to, because transfers, unless you're working to deadline day or something in particular that you've got to get someone in for, these things suddenly hit hold-ups and they take longer than they would take. And so I don't, sometimes I get wind of when something might happen, but there are a few, like Dazelle, and to be fair, I was away, but Dazelle, they just announced it at the forum, I had absolutely no idea that was coming. So yeah, I'm always kind of pestering a few sources and try and find out what's going on. But in terms of when I get wind of something that no one else has got, so obviously that would have been, doesn't happen very often, unfortunately, but so Jacob Farrell, for example, this window, those normally come from talking to someone about something totally different. So someone in the game I'll be having a chat to about something, and then they'll just throw in, oh, there's this Australian left back coming to Pompey, and I'll kind of always be like, no, please tell me more. But so a lot of the things you can work really hard, but actually sometimes the good stories when you land upon them are just kind of, you just get a bit lucky.
So, following on from that, I listened to David Ornstein's done a couple of podcasts with Gary Lineker and Gary Neville and stuff, and he's been talking about it. So he was saying he kind of does a double source. So he'll get it from one source and then he'll go to another from the other club. Or how does that work? So do you have, obviously being more of a local journalist rather than a national, when you get a source from Portsmouth, how do you kind of double check it before you produce an article or something on Twitter saying it? Because you obviously don't want to be wrong.
No, you don't.
So, as a more of a local journalist, how do you go about kind of double checking it without kind of cross wiring?
So unless the player themselves comes to me and said, I'm making this move, which I think has only ever happened once or twice. It doesn't happen very often from a season. If that happened, then I'd just go with a single source and run it. But it just depends. What you're always trying to do is have two different sources told me something, and they haven't got the information from the same source. So you talk about the other club. Sometimes I'll go and try and speak to my opposite number. Obviously, the way BBC Local works, there's some places like London where they've got one station covering 15 clubs, and Manchester they've got one station covering 12, where they generally don't necessarily know because they just don't have the manpower to cover them all. But there's quite a few clubs where I can ring the reporter and say, look, I've heard this, what are you hearing? and they might have some idea, or they might then make some phone calls and let me know. So before you go with something, you're always going to try and find two sources, and you've got to try and make sure that those two sources have not got their information from the same person. It doesn't necessarily have to be one from one club, one from another. It's just got to be, once you've got two people telling you the same thing, that's when you start thinking, right, we're definitely onto something here. Because I sometimes get told random bits of information, and then I might make a few calls and say, "Oh, I've heard this," and someone will just laugh and say, "No, that's a load of rubbish." And that's just how transfers work. You've just got to you know when you get something, you get a bit of information, and then you start making calls, and then you start getting a gut feel whether you might be right or not, and then you kind of try and go, right, can I really stand this up from two places? And if so, then I can run it.
So then when you've passed that, and sometimes you've kind of let us know before the teasers come out, we've seen rumours online and stuff from other accounts, and you'll go, yes, we're going to say, for example, Dazelle, we're going to announce Dazelle today. Do you run that by the club that you're going to announce that, or do you just go ahead and do it? Or is there sometimes they say they know that you know about a signing, but they really want to keep it under in-house until they're ready to announce it? Do they kind of run it past them, or?
There are times where you get a bit of transfer information and you try and get that second source, and someone might say, please, please, please just hold off this for an hour or two. Or they might say, look, I'll give you this other story that you don't know about, but please hold off. The reality is, within clubs, they're always a bit worried about if their interest in a player gets out, then is another club going to suddenly try and gazump them? But the reality is, when you've got to the point where a journalist like me has found out what's going on, the chances are that most people in football and in recruitment already know. I remember Kenny Jackett used to talk about one of the things he wanted from his head of recruitment is he didn't ever want a deal in League One to be done that he didn't know about. And what that was because effectively, if he thought a player was going somewhere and he liked them and he would pay more money, that he would have that opportunity. So there's people within the game talking to each other a lot and finding things out. So I always think it's quite unlikely that a journalist would get information at an early enough stage that they could scupper a deal. But there is sometimes that fear that would be the case. Dazelle, nobody told me about Dazelle. I had absolutely no idea. You see other accounts, you see who reports things. You say David Ornstein, he doesn't really get too involved in Pompey, but if he says someone's signing, you can pretty much take that as absolute gospel. Whereas there are other accounts that are sometimes right, sometimes wrong. So you look at and think, oh, maybe not there. And then you've got to try and filter out the accounts that are just, you don't seem to get as many, but there was a long time when you just got some absolute pure chancer accounts that were clearly just making things up as they went along.
When you go to the club about some rumours, do you cringe a bit? So as excited as I was for about 3 seconds when we were linked with Jed Wallace last week, and I knew it was never going to happen, but you have that little bit of hope, like Matt Ritchie, for example. Are you like, oh, I've got to ask this, but I really don't want to?
Jed Wallace, I didn't even bother because I just knew it was rubbish. And that's always what you've got to weigh up as a journalist, because that rumor came out and I just this isn't happening. But there's always that 1% chance that something weird has happened, and it might happen. But that one I actually just didn't bother putting to anyone because I knew it wasn't going to be the case. You just got to try and kind of weigh these things up and look at what's happening and figure out how likely you think something to be true is, and the Wallace one. But yeah, you do sometimes go to someone and say, oh, look, I've heard this. And they would just so I transparency at the start of the window, maybe before the end of the season, somebody who, I have in football, I've got a good relationship with, told me they're Pompey are going to sign Fulham goalkeeper Stephen Bender, I think it was. I'd never heard of him. But anyway, I looked him up, looked at his profile. You thought, okay, this makes fairly good sense. He's the kind of player Pompey are looking at. They're probably going to bring a goalkeeper in this summer. And then I went to a source and said, oh, I've heard this. And they just said, I don't know what you're talking about. That's absolute rubbish. And it turned out that was rubbish. I don't know where it came from in the first place. But sometimes you just, if some people tell you things, you're willing to try and at least explore them because they're normally right. Other times, yeah, as with Jed, I just sort of just left that one alone because it just wasn't going to happen. Oh, sorry, one thing I was going to say, Matt Ritchie, that was a really interesting one because I knew that he obviously wanted to come back and was quite keen to. I also obviously knew that there were going to be other clubs in the Championship who were probably going to pay him more money. And a lot of the feeling I got from speaking to people is it probably wasn't going to happen. So I was kind of away when that happened. So I still haven't quite got to the bottom of exactly what happened there. But that was one where for most of the summer, the kind of guidance from people I was speaking to was like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. And then it does. That's the thing. It's not these things aren't black and white. 1 minute there can be a player close to signing and it falls through and it doesn't. And then the next minute, someone that they didn't think they were going to get, they can get. These things are, and that's why I go back to people saying how many people are going to sign this week. Well, the answer is nobody knows at the start of the week how many are going to come in, just because there are so many moving pieces.
I suppose you can use an example like that was Jack Sparks, because he ended up at Peterborough, but I believe he was on his way to, was it Bristol Rovers for a medical?
Yeah, I did, and I'd got a vibe that he was probably going to go once Farrell was in. But yeah, and look, there is stories of, was it Tom Naylor who was literally at a club having a medical, got a call from his agent and just disappeared and went back to the car park and drove up and signed for Wigan. So those stories are probably, we probably only know the tip of the iceberg for how often they happen.
I suppose it's like Bishop, really, isn't it? Like you think of the merry-go-round, we have a Bishop.
Yeah, he went to Blackpool. He went to Blackpool thinking he was going to sign there, and basically it seemed like there was, I don't know if there was cross wires, but there was kind of no one there to greet him. He didn't get a feeling that they were desperate for him, and I think he realised, actually, I'm going to be more appreciated at Portsmouth, and got in the car and drove down to Fratton Park.
Not quite as bad as Peter Odemwingie, though, turning up at QPR.
It's more embarrassing if the cameras are there.
Yeah. So we'll kind of carry on with transfers, but I kind of worked it out, I think, that we had 15 arrivals and 16 departures at the end.
Yeah.
So the only one I felt, because that was including then Scully and obviously White. We'll get onto them in a bit. The only one I wanted to say first was the only player we got a fee for was Jack Sparks. Do we have a rough idea of what that fee was? Because obviously I know, especially with Darren McAntony, he likes to keep things under wraps. Do we know, what is it, a low? I would assume it would be a kind of a low six-figure fee, bearing in mind we signed him for nothing.
That would be my guess, but I was away when that happened, so I don't actually know the answer to that one. But you're right, and people I speak to in football do suggest that McAntony is a fairly challenging person to deal with. I guess you look at the people he sold over the years, and what are they going to get? 8 million from Tony going to Saudi? They've done all right in their transfer dealings, but I would guess a low six, maybe 100 grand would be somewhere what I'd guess. But I honestly don't know. I haven't got a clue on that one.
Would there have been, out of the retained list that we saw at the end of last season, was there any surprises for you that were released, or was there anyone that you would, if you were the manager, that you would have liked to have stayed?
So when basically, I think the retained list was a lot of it was quite straightforward, because there was something like 10 or 12 players released who hadn't played more than 5 league games for Portsmouth. Like most of them, I think you could guess. I thought Raggett was going to go. The only one that I thought were going to be interesting was Joe Rafferty and Joe Morrell. Those were kind of two that I wasn't sure about. And I think from what John said to us, that I think they were genuinely still debating that, probably sort of in that last week of the season. And I think by the time it came to it, I would have guessed that they were probably going to go. But beyond those two, I think you could have made a pretty good educated guess on everyone. And I think you can probably make an argument for both Joes either way, really, whether you should or shouldn't have kept them.
But I think with Morale, was it more the injury issue? Because isn't it true that he might not be available to any club till December, January time?
I think it's probably sooner than that was the feeling I was getting, that it would probably maybe looking October. But then I think that recurrence of the injury, I'd have to double check the timeline, but I think that recurrence of the injury happened after the retain list had been out. So maybe that influenced whether they want to put more of an offer forward. But I think the recurrence happened after that. So I don't think that would have affected. But he was the original hope was that he was going to be back for the start of pre-season, or certainly fit for the start of the season. And then the recurrence, which I did speak to some people who suggested that at first they were worried he'd basically redone the whole interview again. They interviewed the whole injury again. It was going to be another kind of 6 months out, and it wasn't the case. So I think it'll be before December, January. But look, he's not signed anywhere yet. I think he's had quite a few offers from people I've spoken to, but I think he's kind of hold out for the right one. And I don't know if people know or don't know that if your contract runs out end of June, if you haven't signed anywhere, Pompey have to pay you an extra month. So he'd have been paid for July. So August would have been the first month that he wouldn't have been paid, and now September.
Okay, that's not one I've heard, but that's an interesting one.
All right,
Russ, do you have? Go on.
One thing I want to ask you, Andrew, is are you sick of the don't go to bed, or do you love it?
No, probably somewhere in the middle. I do find it quite amusing how much all the memes that follow. But there are times when you'll just open your phone and there's 10 people asking me, "Can I go to bed?" I'm just kind of yeah.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
I think it's good fun.
I think it's made transfer windows even more fun than what they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
As soon as you say "don't go to bed," we just know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think now, because I find with the club, they went under Cowley in that and Jacket. You kind of knew what was going on. You know, we had people moaning at the news saying, "Oh, we didn't sign this player because you've put it in the paper and stuff like that." Now we don't know nothing, and they all suddenly this players just signed.
These things kind of comes in cycles when information is kind of getting out and when it's not. And yeah, it did. There definitely was a time when a lot more information seemed to come out beforehand. Now it's kind of less so. But I think I said don't go to bed for Jacob Farrell. He didn't sign for another 9 days. So sometimes you get these things slightly wrong on that element. But look, I think transfers have got to be fun. But I think what always baffles me slightly is that Pompey sign a player and then basically everyone's like, "Who's the next one? Who's the next one? Who's the next one?" And I'm it's a bit like, enjoy the presents you've got. Stop wanting the next one all the time. My favourite ever moment is I once played tennis and came back, got home, looked at my phone, and do you remember? It was the night where somebody thought George Hurst's hand was on a kit release, and I had reams of messages saying, "Is George Hurst returning? And at the time, it was one of those deals that was always unlikely, but not impossible. And it took me 10 or 15 minutes to get to the bottom of. I assumed when I saw all those messages that he was coming, and some journalist had reported it somewhere. And then I got to the bottom of it, and I realised that somebody thought his hand was over. It was Joe Morell's hand. If you ever need to know that one,
I can remember that people were comparing it, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant.
That was one where I was just like, people, this is crazy.
Whenever I do player watch, since I've started, I've learned because I'm normally at the games that you do a question for Guy Whittingham,
yes,
or for whoever's on, and it normally relates to them. So I've got one for you.
Oh, go on.
What transfer was the first ever don't go to bed?
I think it was Joe Rafferty.
It was. I thought it was going to be the Harness Piggott swap.
No, because I'll let you into secret there, because that was when I tweeted that, because I did get a heads up from the club that it was happening. And I just tweeted, "Don't go to bed." And there was somebody was pretty unhappy that I'd done that. So that might be why we don't get heads up anymore, a half-hour notice. But yes, that was the first one.
Fair enough. Yeah. Oh yeah, no, yeah. I generally thought it was the Harness Piggott swap, but when I looked.
No, I tell you, the Harness Piggott swap was a Friday night, and I had gone to bed. I had no idea it was happening, and I basically woke up the next morning and realised I'd missed it all.
Oh, really? Oh, God. Actually, I think I remember that. Everyone telling you to wake up, if I remember.
Yeah.
So I'm going to quickly skip to the departures again, and then we'll go to people that have arrived. I just wanted to talk about Scully and White, just
Yeah.
because they're quite obviously they were brought in last summer to be the kind of the main signings. I know they were both on Scully was a low. It was reported about 150k, I think, at the time, but
No, it was way. It was like 40k. It was way. I know
oh,
it was
okay.
reported that it was way less than that.
Right, okay. So it was kind of, but they were both brought in not as kind of at the time it seemed as kind of your first team wingers,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
to
and they
kind
both
of
started
and
the first game, I think.
yeah,
Yeah, they
and
did. Yeah.
Scully, I think Scully started the first few games quite well, and then obviously the injury, and he kind of never really recovered. Obviously, White was to do with more family issues, and I know the news has done an article today with Rich Hughes talking about that, and I totally get it. It doesn't always work, especially being in Portsmouth. It's quite away from Northern Ireland, and family comes first. So I totally get everything that's going on, and you're mentally not going to be there. Um, where one on Scully was going to be. It was. I saw something that there was another club in that fell through before he went to Colchester.
I don't know about that if that was true. To be
Okay.
honest, I kind of switched off on deadline day when I literally went to the pub once it was confirmed. Once I got wind that no one was coming in.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I know they were negotiating pretty hard with Colchester over who was paying what. I think actually it's very possible, but there hadn't been loads of interest in Scully or White all summer. I think they'd have been willing to let him go if it had come, and it didn't really come through.
So was that what happened with White? Then you think they would kind of no interest had happened, so they went, you know what, we'll just kind of cut ties.
I think it was fairly obvious that no one was going to be willing to pay him the amount he was on. He was probably on a pretty decent League One salary. I don't think anyone was going to come in and pay that. And I'm guessing the fact they severed like that there probably wasn't loads of loan interest, because you might loan him out for a year on paying 50% of his wages, and then if he does well, you might be able to sell him, or you might be able to, you might even want him back. But the problem is if there's loads of things go into a player struggling. The family reason I totally get it must be really hard if you're here and your family are in Northern Ireland. I don't even know where the nearest kind of flight from. I don't even know you can fly from Eastleigh to there anymore. So he obviously wasn't seeing much of his family, and I guess a lot of other English clubs might have looked at that and thought, well, if that's one of the reasons, that's not going to be great for us. But it's a shame. But you just can never quite tell what's going to work out and what's not.
And I think with it's obviously, as you said, it's a tough one, and I don't think you can really complain about them not necessarily working, because I think you could probably only say maybe 4 or 5 signings since Rich Hughes has turned up that have not worked. Probably Scully, White, Stevenson, I would say hasn't particularly worked out, and
I,
probably
I,
Schofield.
so I would just caveat with Stevenson is that I don't think he was on a huge amount of money, and I think he's been really dependable on the few occasions they've needed. So I do think there's probably always room in your squad for solid kind of 6 out of 10 will come in, will do absolutely fine players. So I think on some level Stevenson has worked. Obviously Schofield was quite a cheap backup option, and there was a bit of a feeling that could they get something out of him? He'd had a tough time, and no, they couldn't. That one obviously kind of didn't work. But the reality is, it's a batting average. Nobody gets everything right. Nobody gets everything wrong. And I often say, when you look back to Danny Cowley, he just didn't quite get enough right. It's not like all of his signings were rubbish. If you looked at the promotion team, there's kind of 5 or 6 playing every week that he brought in. He got quite a few right. He just got, if 2 or 3 that he'd got wrong had worked out, things might have been very different. And it becomes quite fine lines on those things.
Yeah, of course. So I'll move on. Is there anything else, Andy, you wanted to say, or the departures before I move on to the comings in? Because I don't want to keep you longer than you need to.
No, go on to the incomings.
Okay, so obviously we spoke about fees out was kind of low 6 figures.
Yeah.
From if I add up all of what's reported, which I know isn't going to be wholly accurate,
Yeah.
it's close to 4 million that
Yeah.
with incomings. Most of that is on Kamara because the only report I could see was 1.7 million, which I
No,
think
that is. I'm going to use this occasion to plug to everyone that if you go on the BBC Sport website and find the Portsmouth pages, I've written a column about the window today, and we've got our new podcast, Who Needs Mourinho, which you can listen on BBC Sounds by searching for Portsmouth. So we kind of discussed the fees on both the podcast and on the website. Kamara was comfortably less than $1 million. I don't reckon I'd have to get a bit of paper, and I reckon you're probably looking at less than 2 million for maybe sort of 1.5 million for all the fees, that kind of area. But they did have 900k for Alex Robertson accepted, and Robertson decided not to go there. So there was money to spend, and the whole sort of Eisner methodology is that they don't mind spending fees on players to bring in if they think they can make the assets better.
you just got to make sure we get another plane out, and then they might spend more money.
So, but going on that, what about like Sorensen? Was that, I think, was it 400k, 300k? Is that
that sounds about right? But unfortunately, again, that was another one when I was at the Olympics, so I was kind of out the loop and almost looking at the end of each day what was going on. So I don't know. That sounds very plausible to me if that was about right.
The centre back from Fulham, is it true? Do you know? Obviously,
no. I think it's slightly less than 500k. It's definitely six figure. I don't know about the 50% sell-on clause. I don't know. That's something I need to try and find out whether that's true or not, because that is quite a hefty sell-on.
That is, because I always thought that was part. My understanding was with Robertson was it wasn't the fee. It was the kind of the issue. It was the sell-on clause. But then since then, it's come out that actually it was just Robertson wanted to go to Cardiff over us.
Yeah, no, Man City had whatever Pompey offered, which I don't know all the add-ons and fit, but about 900,000. That offer was accepted. Pompey were in talks with Robertson. It was nothing to do with the fee. He chose to go to Cardiff, who I imagine were offering him quite a lot more money and wages.
I think it was obviously we talk about the money that was available. I assume you would totally agree that it was the right thing to walk away from Kamara, despite obviously you would really want him, but spending 4.5 million is just not sensible business, is it?
Yeah, again, this is something we chatted about on podcast that was out yesterday. If Pompey's budget is probably just shy of 15 million this season, so again, this is always back of the envelope numbers. You don't spend 1/3 of your budget or somewhere around that on one player. It just doesn't work if you operate like that. It's too much resource into one person. It was interesting when I saw rumours that he might have been available for 2 million. I'd have been thinking, well, maybe that might be worth a punt. But I actually think the fee they paid, I think Norwich have done fairly well. 4.5 million is a lot for a player who has had one good season, and really, you'd say one really good half a season. He wasn't brilliant the first half of last year in League One, and obviously Norwich will have had a good look at him this summer. And if he'd been tearing it up in pre-season, I'd have thought he'd have been in their team. So I think that's one of those fees where you're taking a bit of a gamble paying that much for him. However good we all suspect he probably will go on and become.
Yeah, it's a massive gamble, isn't it? Like, we had some fans on Twitter say, like, oh, it's not a gamble. We know how good he is. And for me, any transfer is a gamble. You don't know what's going to happen.
4.5 million for someone who's got 10 goals in League One is a gamble. However you want to look at it.
Yeah, and to me, it's straight because they didn't really want to let him go, did they, Norwich? So I wondered if that played a part.
So you would have seen all those transfer stories linking him with absolutely everyone over the summer, which I'm pretty sure all came from his agent. And I did speak to someone at Portsmouth after there was a story about they were readying a bid. I said, how long does it take to ready a bid? They said, you basically just send an email saying we offer this much money. It takes 2 minutes. So readying the bid makes it sound like you're firing up the fax machine and getting ready to get that. But yeah, the thing is, him as an individual, just a really laid back, nice guy, really well respected in the squad. So you've got to think what's happened this summer has come from his agent, and maybe he'll have got more money at Hull. But you having met him and watched him, you hope wherever he's ended up, it goes well for him.
So just I'll quickly run through the other fees that I found. There's a couple of players that I didn't. So we've done Bauer. Schmidt, I saw it was around 400k as well.
A little bit less than that, I think.
Harvey Blair, 300.
Yeah, that's spot on.
And that's got
And then,
more fees to be added on, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fairly standard though. But devil's always in the detail of what those are. Are they? You can. It's a bit like Football Manager. You can put a captain England to the World Cup. We owe them £1 million. You put things on how likely. It's probably down to how many appearances he makes for Pompey and probably sell-on clauses.
the two I couldn't find was Ruben Swan, which I know will be quite small compared to the other ones, and Jacob Farrell.
Yeah, Farrell, I don't know. Again, I was away when that started, when that actually went through.
How many
Swan,
bingo
I think,
dollars?
how many Aussie dollars? Swan, I think we're probably looking at 50 to 75,000, that kind of range, I think.
Okay, on Swan, I know obviously he's on loan, but I've seen a couple. He hasn't been in the last few squads haven't, and I know some Pompey fans are venting their frustration. Do we know if he has some kind of injury or whether it's some kind of tactical thing to leave him out? Or
I don't actually know, but that's probably something worth finding out. I knew as soon as when he was signed, it was very much someone who was signed with the view that he's going to go on loan, and he's won. He was the view that he was nowhere near ready for the Championship, and it's in the hope is that he might be at some point. I don't know if he's injured. That's something that might be worth trying to find out.
Is there a transfer that's sort of you're getting the vibe from either Messinio or Hughes or anyone that they're really excited that they've got their hands on?
And that's a good question. I think they were pretty happy to get Silvera on loan, and Potts. Both of those two were definitely deals that they were pretty excited about. Beyond that, I think they were just pretty happy that they fairly solid signings. But then I didn't get to speak to either of them too many times after someone came in. I think Josh Murphy was one that they were, because that was quite a battle with Oxford for him. So I think that was another one they were really pleased to get.
Well, there was, I don't know. This is definitely not true, but on the Oxford end, they were trying to say that we gave him a 20 grand a week contract.
Yeah, that's rubbish.
That's just to make themselves feel better, probably.
Yes.
So, which of our signings probably stands out for you the most, then, Andy?
I think Murphy is one that stands out because of the efforts to go and get him. I think that is a pretty exciting one. I think Matt Ritchie stood out because I think Pompey have probably got a bit of a bargain in terms of he's probably taken quite a lot less money than he could. But I'll be honest, like the rest, like obviously Abdoulaye Kamara looked really good in the last 20 minutes against Sunderland, but a lot of these players, I'll be honest, I haven't really heard of and haven't seen a lot of. So it's probably going to be one bit of a sidestep in the question, but probably easier to know in a few weeks and months' time.
Did you get some sort of any indication with the goalie battle? Like, is Schmidt being brought in to challenge, or is he definitely a number two? Is he, is he looking to be the new number one?
I would imagine he's hoping to be the new number one, but I think Norris has started the season very well, and if he keeps up that form, he'll stay in. But obviously, if he drops off, that might be where Schmidt gets the go. It's interesting because it's nice not having the EFL trophy, but that was always an interesting competition where you got to kind of see people like that play. So we won't potentially get to see Schmidt play. We obviously don't see what they're like in training, but Norris is obviously outstanding at Middlesbrough. Has done pretty and very good against Luton. If he keeps playing that way, he'll stay in the team, I'd imagine.
Are you surprised Norris is getting a lot of flack? There seems to be a lot of call for Schmidt to go out.
But then I always think the danger of that is you're calling for the unknown. You're calling for someone you've never seen play. You're always there's always the temptation to want the person you don't know because you think they potentially could be really good. I thought Norris did pretty well for most of last season. It wasn't flawless, but I thought he was a pretty solid, pretty good signing. So I think it's probably right that he at least gets a crack at keeping that number one shirt this season.
Don't know what that noise was. I assume someone sneezed.
That was my dog. Sorry.
I was going to say it sounded like a dog.
So quickly on the keepers with Jordan Archer, would he have been brought in originally as the number 2 and Schmidt came out kind of later in the window as an opportunity?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because obviously they're on in the window. They took a young keeper from Bournemouth on the tour to Croatia. There was this kind of idea that they were going to get a young third choice keeper. So obviously either that was never quite true, or there was a slight change of strategy to bring someone like Schmidt in. But you probably guess Archer's going to be number 3. I can see why they want 3 keepers because look, last season had Norris got injured, you worry that if you had a month for Schofield in the team, how things might have gone, given that he just wasn't really playing that well. So you can see why they want 3. I guess they could always call Toby Stewart back if they needed, so they're fairly well covered.
Do you know of? Obviously, I think we always hear from managers that we always get off our top targets and that everyone that we've signed is first choice. Is there anyone that you know that we did actually miss out on? Obviously, apart from Kamara and Robertson, where we kind of more Robertson, we did kind of miss out. But is there anyone we were kind of went elsewhere? Or
It's a good question. Like, how close was it Nielsen, for example?
Yeah, I don't know on that one, unfortunately. I would say Robertson and Kamara are probably worth separating as 2 very different deals because Kamara, I think, realistically, it was never likely, but you just wanted to keep making those phone calls, in case something popped up when it was possible. Whereas Robertson was a real top target that they got close and didn't get to. I don't know loads of others that they've gone after. It's the kind of thing you sometimes find out after the event. But
I suppose the other one would be Tino, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but I think again Tino was more in the Kamara camp of they'd love to get him, but he's on a lot of money at Chelsea, and going into the last year of his contract, it was always going to be a bit of a challenge to find a way to get hold of him. So I think he was more in the Kamara camp of they'd love to have had him, but just didn't know. And also I was told that the complete change around at Chelsea in the summer, Pochettino went, but I think a load of behind the scenes changes went. I think that just complicated things as well. It doesn't mean Pompey would have got him if Pochettino stayed, but I think that made things, speaking to people at Chelsea and finding out who's in power, probably got a bit more difficult.
I don't think they know who's in power at their own club, to be honest.
It's not coming across as a well-run club at the moment, is it?
So
go on.
Sorry, go on, Russ, you go.
I was going to kind of jump forward a little bit. So I might have missed it. I've been quite busy at work today. Have we had the squad announced yet? The players that are missing out?
No, I don't think that has to be in until, is it next week or the following week? It's not. I don't think it's this week. So I don't think that's been announced as yet.
Because looking at someone on Twitter made like a predictive sort of squad and deregistering Stevenson, obviously Bishop at the moment. But then when I looked at it, I thought, when it comes to January, unless we sign youngsters, we're going to have to get rid of some players to bring some players in, which is going to make it very interesting. Yeah,
that is going to be ultimately. Yeah, that's the challenge of having a big squad. Yeah, that is going to be something that the recruitment team will have to work on. There's no magic fix to that. You're right. It will be challenging.
So we'll move on from transfers. We'll just, before we let you go, I know we're taking up your evening. We're very grateful for it. Just wanted to say a quick review on how you feel the first 5 games have gone and how the start of the season has gone.
In some ways, I think if you'd offered anyone 3 points from the first 4 games, I think you'd absolutely have taken them. It's obviously frustrating not to get a win, but these fixtures have been really difficult. Luton obviously have not done as well as I thought they might, but I genuinely think it's feasible that all 4 of these clubs end up in the playoffs. I thought Sunderland looked a really good team. Leeds are going to be up there. Borough have spent a fortune. I think I still feel it's too difficult to really get a feel for where this Pompey team is, because you can argue that, well, came very close to beating Middlesbrough and Leeds, and imagine if you had all those points added. Yeah, imagine if you had 7 points now. That'd have been an incredible start. On the flip side, they probably should have lost both of those games based on XG and the chances created. So I think point wise, it's not a bad return. Performance wise, I think it's clear that this is a tough division. You're going to have to probably step up where Pompey have been. I think the new players will get fit and come in and make a difference. But yeah, I think it's difficult to get a complete read on where this team is at the moment. And I think it'll even be tough in the next 3 because there's 3 really difficult games coming up after the break.
Do you think context is key in terms of, though, imagine, say we lost to Leeds and Middlesbrough, but beats Luton. Do you think that would make us feel a bit better that we had to win? The points would be exactly the same.
Maybe. But then you'd have 1 win and 3 losses. I think you could probably argue that either way.
Yeah, I suppose it would depend on the manner of everything that happens. If it plays out the same way that each game has played out, as you said, you could probably justify losing to Leeds and Middlesbrough because of how much they dominated. And we did ride our luck at times, especially that first 10 minutes at Leeds, hitting the crossbar and the post 3 times.
I was at the climbing that day and I saw the last 15 minutes of the first half for the last 10 minutes overall. So I've still never watched back that first 10 minutes.
It was squeaky bum time in the first 10 minutes. And you're like, this is... But with Leeds, you were basically playing a Premier League team in the Championship anyway. Even though obviously they'd sold Gray and Somerville, they still had such a good squad.
And I stayed with a friend who's a Leeds fan the night before the Middlesbrough game up in Yorkshire, and we went to the pub and watched Leeds Sheffield Wednesday, and I thought they looked a really good side then as well. They'll be up there.
2 questions before we finish is, how much stronger do you think this squad is now compared to the League One champions of last season? Do you think we have improved a lot, or is it just...
So there's more depth. I think there's more depth throughout, but is this really squad building? Not having Colby Bishop around is a big blow. I think he was someone ready to take on the Championship. You'd still love a flying top form Abu Kamara to throw in, but I think overall it is stronger, albeit the fact you're even talking about some of the players last season that you would kind of like to have in just kind of shows it's probably a bit stronger, but the first 11 may only be a bit stronger, not necessarily loads stronger.
Do you think I kind of assumed that Sorensen only came in because of the situation that's happened to Bishop? Do you know that, or was he kind of a target that was on our radar anyway?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was away when that deal was done, so I don't really know the answers on that. I would imagine he was definitely someone on the radar, but obviously the Bishop news, they knew about it for a while before it became public. That obviously changed the strategy, and they've probably brought in an extra forward that they may not have done. Would it have been Sorensen? I don't know.
What's your predictions for the season?
Yeah, I still think sort of 17th, 18th. I think they'll have enough to stay up, but I think there'll be some difficult periods. And I think there are fans. If you're 18 and 18, 20, and you've been going to Fratton Park, I don't know, for the past 10 years, you basically haven't really ever seen Pompey lose loads of home games. I know every defeat in League One and League Two felt like a crisis, but you basically won't have seen many defeats. And I think people will, to some degree, have to kind of get used to the fact that Pompey are going to lose more games.
As soon as we went up, I'd turned to my son, who's 11 years old, and is, as you said, not really seen us lose many at home.
No.
And I told him, just get used to losing.
Yeah. The difference is the wins. Imagine Leeds turn up at Fratton Park and you win. That will feel sweeter and better than any League One victory ever could.
Except from Barnsley.
That Barnsley game would be quite difficult to top.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. You kind of got to change your kind of mindset and attitude to, rather than as you say, we only lost 5 games in the league last season, so we were always on getting some kind of point on the board at some point. And this season, that's not going to happen, and it's going to be frustrating. But there's going to be times like Saturday, I think, where you could just see that Sunderland had that bit more class. They've had the experience of being in the Championship a couple of more seasons than us. And hopefully, as long as we stay up, we'll then be in that position in a couple of seasons' time when another fresh League One team comes up and we're in the same position. So
Yeah,
we've just got to kind of just settle down and not. It's not like we're in League One and we obviously under Cowley we won 2 in 17, and when you're one of the teams trying to go up, that's not good enough. But here, if we win 1 in 7 or 8, let's just give the guys a bit of time. It will sort itself out.
There's going to be lots of games where you play teams where if that team plays well, it doesn't matter how Pompey play, they might lose. And I don't think that was really ever the case in League One. No one ever turned up and you thought Pompey could play well and lose unless there was a freak set of circumstances. You just never thought that was going to happen.
As long as we don't hear if you're going to lose, it's a good way to lose again. But I don't think we will.
I don't think you will either.
Well, I think I thought the crowd stuck with the boys pretty well on Saturday. Like, I know there's a few that left as soon as the third goal went in, but overall the crowd went up. There was a bit of a lull at the end because I think everyone just accepted that. I know we did score, but it didn't look like we even have a shot, let alone score in the last sort of 20 minutes.
I don't think I'd ever leave a game after an hour, but I actually kind of understood people that did, because anyone who was there know there was just no way of Pompey were not getting back in that game.
Definitely not. But it was good to see the crowd stay with them. There was no moaning. There was no. You know, and that was the worry of, are we going to go back? I've always felt we'd be better as fans when we're the underdogs.
Yeah.
I think it would be, I think the players, the staff, obviously Messino, Harley, and the coaching staff, Rich Hughes, the players, they've got quite a bit of credit in the bank.
Massively.
To last a long time. So I wouldn't have expected us fans to turn, or I don't expect us to turn at all for a long while. It'd have to be pretty dire for us to have to turn, and I don't think we will, because we've seen a lot of the times last season it didn't quite work against Sunderland. Obviously, the subs were coming on anyway, and that third goal did kind of kill it because the 4 subs were already going to come on when that third went in. But last season, when things weren't working, a lot of the time Messino's substitutions made a difference and had a positive impact on the game.
And that's something few people have said to me. They think he's very good at doing that.
Absolutely. You've got to believe that, okay, I sit about 10 seats away from the dugout. So I watch him and Harley all the time, and they're constantly talking, and they're obviously saying, right, like, who's ready, who's the one. And you can see that it's a collective of the coaching staff. It's not like I'm the manager, I make the decisions. Messino constantly is talking to Harley and Zesh and Joe Perdomo as well, and they're always having a chat, and I think that makes it a lot better. You've got a cohesive staff, coaching staff that goes onto the pitch, and I think that's what happened last season. You could see we had such a good group together, and we've kept a good core of that group. Obviously, a lot of changes have been made. Maybe, do you think that we had more changes than we thought?
Yeah, possibly. I think it was always more likely to be. I think there was a thought there'd be a few additions, but I don't think I was necessarily expecting 15 in. Guys, I've got to shoot in 5 minutes, but I've got time for a few more.
That's fine. I was gonna finish up anyway. Russ, have you got any more for Andy before he goes?
No, that's all good. I could do is shooting off myself, to be honest.
The last question I was going to ask you, Andy, is: are you taking advantage of your lay-ins after you tell us to don't go to bed? Have you been going to bed on a good time in preparation for no sleep?
Yeah. I mean, I've been trying to go to bed at a good time now, but I feel like a grenade is going to be thrown into my sleep pattern pretty soon.
Are you worried about January?
January's miles away.
You got a good 3 months of no one asking what time they can go to bed. So
exactly.
Thank you, Andy, for coming on, mate.
No,
Yes, thank you
thanks
so
for having
much
me,
for
guys.
giving your evening up. It's very kind of you, and I'm sure all of the listeners are very grateful to hear your insights and everything you know.
That's right. I just tell them to listen to our podcast, search for Portsmouth on BBC Sounds, and our stuff on the BBC Sport website. Go take a look. Obviously, as well as listening to Radio Solent.
That's it. Lovely. Thank you, Andy.
Cheers,
Cheers, Russ.
guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Andy.
Andy, before you go, unless you go,
No, I'm still here.
It's Daz's birthday, and Daz is in Paris. Normally, he's on here with us, but he can't be. He was hoping to have a happy birthday from you.
Happy birthday, Daz. Paris is a lovely city. I enjoy my time there. I hope you're enjoying your time there.
Thank you very much, because he'd have killed me if I forgot that. So, thank you, Andy. Thank you, Russ. And thank you to all of the listeners. And we'll catch up in a couple of weeks after the West Brom game.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.